Hello, here I am again in the name of the sovereign creator of heaven and earth, the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm continuing with my exposition of my translation of Genesis. We come to chapter 31. Jacob returns to Canaan. I'll first read verses 1 through 13. Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has acquired all his wealth. And Jacob also saw that Laban's countenance was not favorable toward him as before. Then Jehovah said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock. And he said to them, I see that your father's countenance is not favorable toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me, and you yourselves know that I have served your father with all my might. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to do me harm. If he said, the speckled ones will be your wages, then all the flocks would bear speckled. And if he said, the streaked ones will be your wages, then all the flocks would bear streaked. So God took away your father's livestock and gave them to me. And it happened at the time when the flock conceived that I lifted my eyes and saw a dream, and behold, the male goats that mated with the flock were streaked, speckled, or spotted. And the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift your eyes and see. All the male goats that mate with the flock are streaked, speckled, or spotted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land, and return to your native land. A couple things here. The complaint of Laban's sons in the first verse, only the second half was true. The first half was not true. Now, in verse 3, we have God sending Jacob back to Canaan. It was time to do that, actually. It was time to do so. Now, I find this bit about the dream that God gave him to be curious. And so I ask, what was the point of the dream? I suppose that God was claiming direct responsibility for Jacob's prosperity. What I imagine. Now, it's interesting to me that in verse 13, God mentions the vow that Jacob made. And God had blessed him, and that was part of the vow, okay? But now God had to get Jacob back to the land. Now, in verse 15, at the end, God tells him to go to his native land. Strictly speaking, his native land would be south of Hebron, but probably included Hebron, since both Abraham and Isaac spent time there. And God told him to go there. Let's read now verses 14 through 21. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, Is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Does he not regard us as strangers? For he sold us and has devoured all our money. For all the wealth that God took from our father belongs to us and to our children. So then, do everything that God has said to you. Then Jacob went into action and put his sons and his wives on camels. He took away all his livestock and all the possessions that he had acquired, the livestock that he had accumulated in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen her father's household idols. And Jacob deceived Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was going to run away. So he departed with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river and headed toward Mount Gilead. A couple things here. At the end of verse 15, the two wives say that their father has devoured all their money. It has often been assumed that the reference is to the price that Jacob paid for them, but that was 7 years' work for each one of them. Since God prospered Laban during those 14 years, could the reference be to that prosperity? But during the following 6 years, God himself transferred that prosperity to Jacob. Could the reference be to what they might have inherited from their father, but now belongs to Jacob? That seems to be the point of the next verse, anyway. Going on, God took from our father. They recognized that God's hand was at work there. This is still the wives that are speaking. Now that their word though ends at verse 16. Now in verse 18, to Isaac in the land of Canaan. Isaac was living in Hebron at that time, and Jacob just simply took his time getting there, as I'll explain below. Now, Rachel stole her father's household idols. And that was the whole point. That was why Laban pursued them. Otherwise, he would have been glad to get rid of Jacob, as he himself said. But those idols, I'll talk about that in a minute. But why does it say run away? Well, you know, Jacob was still responsible for Laban's flock, and he was going to leave him in the lurch, so to say. However, apparently taking care of the flock did not include the shearing of the sheep, which Laban himself was doing. In verse 5, it says that, verse 21, it says that he crossed the river. That would have been the Euphrates River. Okay, now let's go to verses 22 through 30. Jacob and Laban. That's going to go on for a while. On the third day, Laban was told that Jacob had fled. So he took his brothers with him and followed him for 7 days and overtook him in Mount Gilead. Parenthesis, but God had come to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night and said to him, be careful not to speak to Jacob, either good or bad. Close parenthesis. So Laban caught up with Jacob, who had pitched his tent in that mountain. Laban and his brothers also pitched their tent in Mount Gilead. Then Laban said to Jacob, what have you done, that you have deceived me and carried my daughters away like captives of the sword? Why did you run away secretly and deceive me and did not tell me? For I would have sent you away with joy and song, with tambourine and harp. Nor did you allow me to kiss my sons and daughters. You have acted foolishly. There is power in my hand to harm you, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, take heed that you do not speak to Jacob, either good or bad. So now you have really left because you long for your father's house. But why did you steal my family idols? That was the point. In verse 23, it says he took his brothers. probably means his sons, but he may have had some brothers. We aren't told anything about his brothers, just his sisters. But certainly his sons were all adult men. He would have taken them. Now, in verse 29, he says, the God of your father. Actually, the Hebrew text has your plural father, but the literal meaning is impossible. Since your in English is ambiguous as to number, our versions hide the problem. Perhaps it is the honorific form for your singular. Rebecca, after all, was Laban's sister. In the Septuagint, that's the Greek translation, your is in fact singular. Just by the way. In verse 30, at the end of his speech, Laban's speech, we get to the real problem. And that was the way they did, The rest of it was just taking time. The real problem is at the very end. Why did you steal my family idols? That was the problem, of course, and that was a costly expedition, right? It took him 7 days in one direction, which would take him another 7 days going back, right? It was the disappearance of the idols. If it weren't for that, Laban would have celebrated Jacob's departure. He himself said he would have done that. But at that time, here's the point, at that time and in that region, the possession of such idols by a son-in-law gave him the right of the firstborn son in the inheritance left by his father-in-law, to the detriment of his father-in-law's own children. That was the problem. That was why Laban went after them. And of course, Jacob didn't know anything about what Rachel had done. He did not appreciate being accused of such a crime. That was a serious business. And Jacob was innocent. He didn't know anything about it. Okay, let's go on now. Verses 31 through 35. Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, because I was afraid, for I thought that you might take your daughters from me by force, he goes on there, with whomever you find your idols, let him not live. In the presence of our brothers, search for yourself whether I have anything of yours with me, and take it. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and into Leah's tent and into the tent of the two maidservants, but did not find anything. Then he left Leah's tent and went into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the idols and put them in the saddle of her camel and sat on them. And Laban felt all over the tent, but did not find anything. And she said to her father, do not be angry, my lord, that I cannot get up before you, for I am in the manner of women. So he searched, but did not find the idols. Only one thing to comment on here, the manner of women means she claimed that she was menstruating. That's how come she couldn't get up. Okay, let's go on now to verses 36 through 42. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban. Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my transgression? What is my sin that you have so furiously pursued me? Although you have felt around all my belongings, what have you found of all the things in your house? Set it here before my brothers and your brothers, and let them judge between us both. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your she-goats have not miscarried. I have not eaten the rams of your flock. I did not bring you what was torn to pieces. I replaced it. You required at my hand both what was stolen by day and what was stolen by night. My case was like this. The heat consumed me by day and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. 14 years I served you for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been with me, surely you would now have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the work of my hands, and he rebuked you last night. Well, that's all straightforward, all very clear. Just by the way, the fear of Isaac, the fear, that was his God. Okay, let's go on now, and I will read verses 43 through 55, and that brings us to the end of the chapter and also this video. Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, the daughters are my daughters, and the sons are my sons, and the flocks are my flocks, and everything you see is mine. But what can I do today for these daughters of mine, or for their children whom they have borne? Now therefore come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be for a witness between you and me. Then Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar, and Jacob said to his brothers, gather stones. So they took stones and made a heap of them, and they sat there beside the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Galid. Then Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me today. Therefore it was called Galid. Also Mizpah, because he said, may Jehovah watch between you and me when we are separated from each other. If you harm my daughters or take wives beside my daughters while no one is with us, remember God is a witness between you and me. Laban also said to Jacob, look at this heap and the pillar that I have set up between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness that I will not go past this heap toward you, and that you will not go past this heap and this pillar toward me for harm. May the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judge between us. Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and invited his brothers to eat bread, and they ate bread and spent the night on the mountain. Laban got up early in the morning and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. Several things here that I'd like to comment on. In verse 43, Laban says, everything you see is mine. Well, you know, that was not true. Jacob had bought everything with his work. 20 years of work. Now then, the two names, Laban called it Jegar, said who that would have been Aramaic. Jacob called it Galid, that would have been Hebrew. But they both mean heap of witness. Then also Mizpah, that meant watchtower. That was what Laban said. Now, this bit about God watching between you and me, Jehovah, he actually appeals to Jehovah. But first, he says, while no one is with us, that's in verse 50, the reference would appear to be to a mediator or a go-between. The whole song and dance here, he says at the end of verse 52, for harm. The whole point is that Laban was still suspicious. The unavoidable fact was that his idols were no longer in their place in his house, and they disappeared exactly when Jacob left. 2 + 2 = 4. You know, Jacob could have buried the idols, who knows what, to use them later. The whole procedure was to ensure that Jacob would not use the idols against Laban's sons. That was the whole point. All the whole bit about the pillars and what, for harm. It's very curious, I find it. Laban appeals to the God of Abraham, the God of Nahor. Nahor was his grandfather, as Abraham was Jacob's grandfather, and then even the great-grandfather. It's curious, I think so anyway. In verse 49, he had appealed directly to Jehovah. I think he was just wanting to constrain Jacob by appealing to them. Laban knew who Jehovah was, but he didn't associate him with him very much, I don't think. But he knew that Jehovah was Jacob's God, and that was his. Well, that's it for tonight. Thanks for watching, and God bless.